Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on healthy weight management strategies in clinical practice. This webinar is part of an ongoing public health and primary care series featuring public health experts offering valuable training and resources to primary care providers, along with ideas and examples of how the two can work together to improve population health. So just want to give a quick heads up about some of the interactive pieces that we'll be using today. So before I turn things over to our expert, I just want to review that we will field your questions at any time if you just enter them into the chat or into the question and answer pane on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll have plenty of time set aside to take your questions at the end. But again, please feel free to submit them at any time. And we will be participating in 2 polls during the course of the webinar. Those are also located on the right-hand side of your screen on the polls tab. We will let you know when those polls are live, and then you can select your answer and we'll read the collective responses. And then we'll also have an opportunity for you to raise your hand if you would like to speak and share. And the raise your hand feature is located if you go to the attendees tab here, and you can raise your hand next to your name. There'll be a little icon on the right next to your name. And then just a few words first about the Patient-Centered Primary Care Institute. So the Institute is a public-private partnership that was launched in 2012 with the support of the Oregon Health Authority and Northwest Health Foundation. It is currently managed by Q Corp. Together with the experts we partner with, our goal is to get primary care practices connected to a broad array of technical assistance as they work towards the patient-centered primary care home or medical home model of care. We work to serve practices at all stages of transformation and to build capacity and create alignment to support ongoing transformation and quality improvement in Oregon. We encourage you to visit our website, www.pcpci.org, to access resources, including previous webinars. And then you can sign up for our email list on the website, which is how we will announce additional web-based and in-person training opportunities, as well as future Institute programs. And also, I apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Rebecca Bally, and I'm a Facilitation and Improvement Specialist here at Q Corp. And then also with me is Marissa Sweeney, who will help field your questions. But today we are here to hear from our expert, Helen Bellanca, Associate Medical Director from HealthShare of Oregon. Helen is a family physician with expertise in reproductive health. She's the co-creator of One Key Question initiative to better integrate reproductive health into primary care. She was a key advocate for the adoption of Oregon's contraceptive metric, and as a content expert, she was involved in the development of the specifications of the metric. She was also the chair of the national work group considering contraceptive metrics and participated in the development of the national metric on contraception. She is currently the Associate Medical Director of HealthShare of Oregon, the state's largest coordinated care organization. And I think that was a bio for a previous webinar she did for us, but I will let her introduce herself and her expertise on this topic at hand, healthy weight management. So Helen, the control is now yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to Rebecca and Marissa and all the staff at QCOR and the Patient-Centered Primary Care Institute for hosting these webinars. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And thank you to all the attendees for coming or for participating in the webinar. It's a huge topic that many people are interested in, and we'll try to scratch the surface at least today. So I'm trying to advance the slide, Rebecca, and we have the sleepy problem again. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So our learning objectives today are to review the current science on the causes and factors of obesity. That is an enormous field of research, and we're not even going to come anywhere close to doing it justice. but there are a couple of interesting things in recent research around weight management and obesity that I think have, well, they've really influenced my clinical practice, and I think they're useful bits of information that could influence yours, so we'll talk about those. Our second objective is to understand the principles of healthy weight management and how they differ from weight loss strategies, and then to learn various tactics that clinics can use to address healthy weight management in their populations. So as Rebecca was saying, I do have some expertise in contraception and reproductive health care, but I also have been working in the area of weight management for quite a long time. In 2004 to 2007, I was the director of a federal grant to address obesity in Hispanic farmworker populations out in the Columbia River Gorge as part of a primary care practice out there. And as part of that work, I developed a lot of tools and expertise for working with communities and clinics on healthy weight management strategies. Ever since that time, I've worked with clinicians in 3 different health systems to figure out how does primary care approach healthy weight management, what is reasonable for primary care to take on in this very difficult field, and how do we actually make it work in our day-to-day practices. As part of my work out in Hood River, I developed a guide. It's called Healthy Weight Management is for Everyone. I apologize, the slides are a little, there it is. Here's the Healthy Weight Management Clinical Guide that we developed as part of that grant out in the Columbia River Gorge. It's available in English and Spanish, or it used to be available. The first question I always get is, where do we get this guide? It's currently not being printed anymore. And I think that's okay. Some of the most key points from it will be included today. If you're really interested in getting detailed information from this guide, I have a copy of the guide myself, but it's not available in print anymore. And please contact me offline if you want to get more details on these guides. These guides were meant to live in the exam room and serve as tools and prompts and scripts for clinicians to have discussions with their patients about healthy weight management. But as most guides like this, we learned a lot when we were creating it, but we learned even more from using it. And some of the things in there we found really useful, and some of the things over time turned out to be less useful than we thought they would be. So if you're really interested in really practical tools that would live in the exam room, like I said, get in touch with me offline, and we can talk about what's available. So there we go. So there's basically 3 pieces of information that we're going to try to cover today. Part 1 is what I call calories in minus calories out equals weight gain is bad math. And I think this is, if there's a couple of take-home points today, I think this is one of the fallacies and the myths out there about weight management that we as clinicians have an obligation to really be conscientious of. This idea that all you have to do is pay attention to how many calories are going in and how many calories are going out, and it's just arithmetic. So if there's more calories going in than going out, you're going to gain weight. That is a gross oversimplification of a very complex physiology, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is and how we can better counsel our patients regarding calories. Part 2 is my recommendation to stop routinely weighing your adult patients. I know that's controversial and concerning for people, and we'll talk about why that is later in the presentation. And part 3 is to talk with everyone about healthy weight management strategies, regardless of what they weigh. So part 1, talking about energy imbalance. This is the message that is most commonly out there about healthy weight management. Too many calories in plus too few calories burned equals weight gain. That's what we always hear. That's the message that it pervades our culture. And it's not exactly true. And the reason it's not exactly true is that it's a simple arithmetic equation. It's addition and subtraction, when in reality, the physiology looks more like calculus. It is true that if you eat more calories than you burn, you are likely to gain weight. But there are so many other things that will influence whether or not you gain weight, and so many other complicating issues that when we talk about weight gain as simple arithmetic like that, we are misleading patients and adding to their frustration. 3,500 calories is a pound, but only in the laboratory. If a person consumes an excess of 3,500 calories, they may or may not gain a pound. They may gain 2 pounds. They may lose half a pound. It depends on so many other factors that are going on in a person's body. And I think one of the things we need to do is stop giving this message that it's just about adding and subtracting calories. We're going to talk a little bit about what might go into weight gain other than calories in, calories out, and why it's so complicated for our patients. But just to give you an overview of the kinds of things that research is really showing about what influences weight gain in addition to calories in and calories out, certainly genetics and gene expression are huge. The gut microbiome is such an interesting area of research that is really showing a lot of influence in weight gain. Leptin and ghrelin are 2 hormones that influence appetite, satiety, weight gain, just how hungry you feel and how much food you need to feel satisfied. And they have profound influences from many different parts of the environment. Artificial sweeteners that are ubiquitous in all of our foods. Viruses actually have shown a role in weight gain. Of course they have, because viruses we blame for everything, but there is some evidence that viruses, being infected with certain viruses, can trigger certain genes to be more active and cause weight gain. Trauma is a very big one. When people have experienced physical or psychological trauma in their lives, the chances that they will have struggles with healthy weight management are greatly increased, and we're learning a lot more about that. Hormones, certainly we've known for a long time, these are the reproductive hormones as well as stress hormones can influence whether or not you gain weight. Stress in and of itself causes changes in inflammation throughout your body that can lead to weight gain and promote weight gain. Mindlessness and distraction are really big factors. There's some really interesting research about how paying attention versus not paying attention to what's going on in your environment can really influence your weight gain and how much more people will eat when they are distracted. Plastics have a really interesting role. There are so many plastics in our environment that influence our genes and genetic expression. Sleep deprivation. And then when you were a fetus, whether or not your mother smoked during pregnancy and whether or not she gained weight at an appropriate rate and the types of food she ate can influence whether you experience weight management problems. So in the face of all this, it's really difficult for our patients to hear that it's just calories in, calories out. They're dealing with a number of other factors that are going to influence their weight that they don't necessarily have that much control over. So I want to review a little bit of the science of what we know so far about weight management. I apologize for the cadence of the slides here. There's a little pause between when I advance things and when it goes. We'll keep working on that. But first of all, genetics and gene expression are clearly an important role in weight management. We've known this for a long time. There's been a huge search for an obesity gene. Of course, the drug companies would love to find an obesity gene because then they could build a drug that would target that gene and cure obesity, and that hasn't happened. To date, there are at least 50 genes that are directly involved with weight gain and weight management, and we know that the heritability of obesity may be as high as 50 to 70% in modern developed populations. So if you have a family history of weight struggles, the chances that you yourself will have weight struggles, regardless of how well you do with your eating and exercise, is pretty profound. People are really on an uphill battle when they have a strong family history of overweight and obesity. But also what I think is really interesting about genetics is the extent to which you gain weight with excess calorie is largely genetically determined. So this gets back to that calories in, calories out problem. For some people, if they eat in excess of 3,500 calories, they may gain 2 pounds. And for other people, if they eat in excess of 3,500 calories, they may not gain any weight. And where you fall on that spectrum is genetically determined. It's the efficiency of your metabolism, how many calories you let slide versus store given excesses. When your body experiences an excess of calories, what does it do with it? And that's largely genetically determined. So a lot of what we do with weight management with people is tell them, like, look, everybody else does this, here's this program, all you do is cut your calories by this much and you will lose weight. Well, the fact that some people do lose weight and don't lose weight isn't entirely within their control. It's a very powerful genetic influence on how thrifty your genes are. The really exciting field in genetics is called epigenetics, and we're learning more and more about this. Epigenetics is this idea of a dimmer switch on our genes. We used to believe that if you have a gene for a certain trait, that gene was either turned on or turned off. And epigenetics is the science of basically many genes have a dimmer switch. And so the extent to which that trait is expressed can be influenced by your environment. This is absolutely fascinating research, and what they learned specifically in obesity is that if you do not have any genetic predisposition to obesity per se, but you experience significant trauma, such as going through a war, a famine, slavery, severe poverty for multiple generations, that those external environmental stressors turn on certain genes and make their influence more prominent than they otherwise would be. And so then that trait is then passed down. So when we look at generations of people whose parents and grandparents experience significant trauma, their likelihood for being overweight and obese is much increased. And in animal studies, they can track the epigenetics. They can expose one generation of mice to a severe trauma and then follow that same trauma being expressed in subsequent generations of that mouse and their likelihood to be obese. It's really fascinating research, and it's something that we need to keep in mind, especially when we talk about certain communities of color that are particularly affected by overweight and obesity. This was where we landed with our project in Hood River. We were particularly looking at Hispanic communities and their relationship with weight. And you can see, you know, in communities that have experienced significant trauma as a cultural issue, that this is a real problem. It also exists, of course, in African Americans and Native Americans. We have to be really cautious about making judgments about where people, you know, the extent to which they have control over their weight, given the levels of historical trauma that these communities have faced. The gut microbiome is also a fascinating area of research. So this is this refers to the billions of bacteria that live in your intestinal system and that help you digest your food. And there's an exploding amount of research around the gut microbiome. It is so important to our health and our well-being and whether or not we develop certain illnesses. And its prominence in our health is really gaining a lot of ground. But really interesting for our talk today is the role of the gut microbiome in weight management and weight gain. It turns out there are two key bacteria in your gut, and their relative ratio determines if you have a lean microbiome or an obese microbiome. And what I mean by that is if you happen to have the lean microbiome, then you don't absorb as many calories from your food as if you have the obese microbiome. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's transmissible. So if you take mice who have a lean microbiome, and they absolutely control every calorie and the energy expenditure of these mice, so it's not an effect on physiology in other ways. It's purely isolated effect of the bacteria. If you feed certain amount of calories to mice with a lean microbiome, they won't gain as much weight as those with an obese microbiome. And then you can do a transplant. You can take those bacteria, transplant them into the gut of the lean rat, and make that rat become obese just by changing the composition of bacteria in their gut. It's absolutely fascinating, and it reveals a lot about what's going on in our bodies and how little control some people do have. It is true that some people will gain weight with a more modest increase in calories than other people, and it has to do with bacteria in your gut. This is a great article. I try to include all the citations for the key research at the bottom of each slide. This was an article published in Nature. It really made a big impact on the scientific community when this study came out, because it really turns things on its head in terms of how much control we perceive people have over whether or not they gain weight. Leptin and ghrelin have been studied for probably 2 decades now. And this was a real revolution when we first realized about leptin and ghrelin. We used to think that fat was just storage tissue in our bodies and that its pure function was just reserves. We know a lot more about fat tissue now, and we know that it's metabolically active. So leptin is the hormone that's produced by adipose tissue in your body, and it acts on your brain to tell you to stop eating. We know that people that struggle with obesity have leptin resistance, and this behaves much in the same way as insulin resistance in diabetics, that really people who struggle with their weight and have been overweight for a very long time don't get the same satiety cues as other people do. So when their body has had sufficient calories, they don't get that cue of feeling like I'm full, I don't want to eat anymore. Their body continues to send them hunger signals. They really are more hungry than other people. It's a really interesting area of research, and we're learning a lot about what controls leptin levels, because of course that was one that the drug companies were all over. If we could increase leptin in people's body, we would make them feel full all the time. They would stop eating and they would lose weight. But of course, like many things in our physiology, it's very complex and complicated. Eating and weight gain are absolutely crucial to our survival as humans. There's arguably nothing else that's more crucial than having enough food and water. So when anything threatens our environment, our brain is carefully tuned to get signals to eat more or to eat less based on what's going on in our environment. And anytime you manipulate one piece of that enormous algorithm, you're going to have effects somewhere else that will compensate for it. It's a very redundant system because our survival depends on it. So leptin is a really important hormone that tells people when they're full and they don't need to eat anymore. Ghrelin is kind of the counterpart. It's the hormone that triggers you to eat. And it's released by your GI tract. I apologize, there's a typo on this slide. It's released by your stomach and your small intestine when your stomach is full, not when it's empty. So it's the stretch of your stomach and the small intestine. When your stomach is stretched from volume, then ghrelin is oh, sorry, I apologize. No, I had it right. I apologize. I saw the word empty. It's triggered when your stomach is empty, and it shuts off when your stomach is stretched. So it's kind of present in your body all the time when your GI system is empty, and then it shuts off when your stomach is stretched. So it's when your stomach feels a sense of volume, then you get a signal to stop eating. So ghrelin is your hunger hormone, and it also acts on your brain. Interestingly, it acts on the part of your brain that's related to dopamine. It's the reward center of your brain. This is what makes eating pleasurable. And so you can imagine if you have a disorder of ghrelin and you have issues around addiction and a disordered dopamine system, you're going to get more triggers to eat as a way of gaining pleasure from food and triggering that dopamine release. So those hormones work together and independent of each other on different areas of our brain to trigger hunger and satiety. One of my favorite areas of research, and the first one we're going to talk about today when we talk about counseling patients, is sleep deprivation. You know, I think this is a really poorly examined area of clinical practice. We don't talk about sleep nearly as much as we should, and it has such a profound impact on people's health. And in terms of weight management, it's been a very consistent finding in both adults and children that sleep deprivation causes weight gain. If you hold everything else constant, the amount of calories people eat, the amount of exercise they're getting, even the amount of stress in their life, if everything else is constant and all you do is alter how much sleep they're getting, you can cause weight gain in both adults and children. And so it is the first thing that I always talk about with people when they're struggling with their weight, is how much sleep that they're getting. We think that sleep deprivation causes a decrease in leptin and increases ghrelin secretion. So when you're sleep deprived, it makes you feel more hungry, and it takes a much longer time to get a satiety signal, to get that signal that you've had enough food. It's very likely that it's also related to cortisol. Sleep deprivation is a sign of stress, and when your cortisol and your adrenergic system is amped up in your body, one of the first things you need to do is eat. Your body is sensing a period of stress, and in any kind of stress, whether it's a physical stress or a psychological stress, your body has an impulse to eat and store calories because you don't know what's ahead. So it's a very healthy function, but we're bringing it on for reasons that could be prevented. So if we got more sleep, we could prevent it. Here are some of the numbers about this. Only 26% of U.S. adults get 8 hours of sleep or more. That's pretty stunning. And for our physiological needs, adults seem to need about 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I don't know very many people who get 8 to 9 hours consistently of sleep. But when you hold all other things constant, someone getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which is still in the recommended range, so a 7 or more is what's recommended. And if you get 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night, your risk for obesity is 9% higher than it would be if you got more than 8 hours of sleep. But when you get in that 6 to 7 range, which seems to be where most adults live, your risk of obesity is 24% higher than people getting 8 or more hours of sleep. And then once you're down in that 5 to 6 range, it's 49% increased risk of obesity, and less than 5 hours sleep, 85%. It's a linear relationship. It's a dose response. The less sleep you get, the more likely you are to gain weight. And I know what everyone's going to say. This is what all my patients say to me, but I don't need that much sleep. I do fine with 5 hours of sleep. I've always gotten that much. It's fine. And this is really borne out in science so consistently that we can say with certainty that even though you feel like you can manage with less sleep and you're able to cope and get through and do the things you need to do with less sleep, your physiology doesn't function as well. And what we can tell people is if you choose to get 5 to 6 hours of sleep and you can function well, that's fine, but you have to know that you are promoting weight gain and you are, again, increasing how steep your hill is when you're trying to lose weight, because everything in your body is going to fight weight loss. So when people are coming and they're saying, I'm doing everything, I'm eating really well, and I'm exercising, and I'm not losing weight, if you ask about their sleep, it's one of the key factors that probably is holding them back. Sleep deprivation will cause you to hang on to excess stores because it's a sign of stress for your body. One of the last things I want to touch on is stress and trauma, and then we're going to move on to sort of the more clinical pieces. Stress and trauma is a really important area of healthy weight management, again, that isn't talked about much. And I came upon this sort of, I guess the way all clinical discoveries are made. If you really want to convince yourself of something, start asking people about what's going on for them. When I did this work in healthy weight management, I became a bit of an internal expert, as you can imagine, in the 3 different practices that I worked in after doing the work in healthy weight management. All of my partners would send their patients to me sort of as an internal referral, which I welcomed. I encouraged them to do that. And so I worked with a lot of patients, not just my own patients, on healthy weight management strategies. And I would have whole days filled with appointments where I would just talk about this with people. And I started doing more detailed histories about people's lives, and I found what many other researchers have found for a long time, and that is that people with a history of stress and trauma, especially early life trauma, are much more likely to go into adulthood, early adulthood and late adulthood, as obese. In fact, what I noticed is, especially with women, most of the patients I saw in my primary care practice were middle-aged women, 30s to 55, 60, who were significantly overweight. And when you ask them, a great majority of them had been sexually abused as children. It was so common that it was sort of my first go-to place that I wanted to understand that part of their history first before we talked about almost anything else. And of course, many of you may be familiar with the ACEs work, the ACEs meaning the Adverse Childhood Experiences work. That's an ongoing study. It's been going on for about 20 years out of Kaiser in California, looking at the impact of adverse childhood experiences on lifelong health. And so they found that children who experienced abuse or neglect, physical, emotional, sexual abuse or neglect, or if there was some sort of significant household dysfunction, like a parent in prison or a parent with mental illness or substance use, that those children had a much higher risk of early death from disease, from cardiovascular disease, from cancers. They were much more likely to smoke and use illicit substances. And the correlations have been pretty profound, and I think it's permeated our clinical cultures quite significantly, this idea that early life trauma has an impact on lifelong health. But what most people don't realize is that original ACEs study came from a weight loss trial. So Dr. Felitti, who's the author of that original study, one of the 2 authors of that original study, he was running a weight loss clinic. And he noticed that there were a number of people in his clinic who were having great success. They came in significantly overweight, and they lost a lot of weight. They lost 30, 40, 50 pounds or more as part of his clinical weight loss program. But the people tended to divide, successful weight loss participants tended to divide themselves in 2 camps. Some were successful and kept going with the program until they got, really steady in their weight loss. And others would lose a significant chunk of weight and then drop out of the program. And it was about 1/3 of the participants that dropped out. And he was wondering about that, like if they were having success with weight loss, why they would drop off. And he went and followed them and followed up with them and talked to them more. And he realized that nearly all of them had had significant early life trauma. And there was something about the weight loss that was particularly triggering for them, that they it was sort of a psychological and a physical comfort, or a barrier for them in some ways, that physiologically and psychologically their weight was protecting them and helping them. And when they lost weight, they experienced an incredible increase in anxiety and dropped out of the program. So all of our understanding about what ACEs are and their lifelong impact on health had their origins in understanding the relationship between early life trauma and lifelong obesity. So this is a really important area that we need to pay attention to. What the research bears is that adults with a history of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse were 34% more likely to be obese than adults without that history. That's a pretty high number. But if you look at the special population of adults who are signed up for bariatric surgery and are in the preparing phase for bariatric surgery, and you ask those people about their history of childhood abuse, 69% report significant childhood abuse. It might be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It's enormous. So the link between significant obesity and early life trauma is really important. Of course, then the follow-up after that bariatric surgery doesn't go so well. So we always push bariatric surgery and weight loss for all of our patients, saying this is going to be good for you. And what we don't realize is sometimes weight loss can be harmful for people. There's an enormous increase in the rate of suicide after bariatric surgery, and I believe it's related to Dr. Felidi's original finding that you can really increase someone's anxiety and change their life in ways that are profoundly uncomfortable for them by having them experience significant weight loss. So it's something to consider. Bariatric surgery is, of course, still an option, but I think if we ignore the link between trauma and stress and weight, we're really missing an important opportunity, an important aspect of our patients' health. And of course, many of our patients experience significant stress and trauma in their life, whether it's violence, domestic violence, community violence, racism, and oppression. Poverty alone is a constant stress. People who live in poverty face a daily level of stress that it's unimaginable for those of us who don't experience it. Unemployment, and of course, adverse childhood events, as I mentioned. What are the mechanisms by which stress and trauma may cause obesity? Of course, there are some psychological and emotional effects, and people used to think that this would entirely explain why people gained weight with stress and trauma. If you've had stress and trauma, of course, you're more anxious, you're going to have a lot of shame, there's a lot of emotional eating, it's eating to soothe yourself, and that certainly happens, that's definitely a part of it. But there are also biological effects. We can trace in people with significant stress and trauma an increase in inflammation, a ramping up of your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis reactivity. So you have more stress reactivity and your body is in a constant state of vigilance and alert, which again promotes weight gain and causes you to feel more hungry. People that have stress and trauma have sleep disturbances, and so then you set off the whole cascade of events that happen with sleep, with leptin resistance and increase in hunger just from the sleep disturbance, and then a suppressed immune system. And then, yes, sorry, last one is increased levels of ghrelin. So people who have stress and trauma actually do feel physiologically more hungry than if they don't have stress and trauma. Your body is triggering you to eat to protect you against whatever may be coming ahead. I think this is the last one, and then we're going to move on to some clinical pointers, because I know that's why you're all here today. I want to talk a little bit about beverages, because this is an underrated part of weight management that I think bears attention. It's important to know that calories from beverages are more likely to cause weight gain than the same calories from food. And that's because beverages don't trigger satiety signals. Beverages don't stretch your stomach. You have to get that stretched stomach to stop the food, and beverages pass right through. And so if you drink your calories, you're far more likely to gain weight than if you eat those exact same calories. There's also no compensation at the next meal. So they did some really interesting studies giving people a 100-calorie food snack in the middle of the afternoon versus a 100-calorie beverage snack. And what they noticed is people that had the food snack compensated at their next meal by eating fewer calories. And the people that had the beverage snack didn't compensate. So you don't get that benefit of then balancing out your calories later in the day. So when you have excess calories from food, you'll tend to balance them out. When you have excess calories from beverages, you don't balance them out, and that's one of the main reasons it causes weight gain. When they asked people to attempt different strategies for losing weight, if you reduce your liquid calories, those people were more successful at short and long-term weight loss than those who reduced their solid calories. Fructose, it's really important to mention fructose here. I think the high fructose corn syrup has certainly had its day in the community stage and has been properly vilified from all angles, but it's worth mentioning that fructose particularly acts in the liver to cause leptin resistance. And remember, leptin resistance means you're going to take a much longer time to feel hungry. So if you eat foods that are high in fructose, high fructose corn syrup, in addition to the excess calories that they have, they also trigger your brain to make it take longer for you to feel hungry. So avoiding high fructose products is really important if you're interested in healthy weight management. Diet beverages are not any better. The artificial sweeteners that people put in diet beverages actually trigger you to eat more. They cause you to seek and consume more calories. I used to have a huge slide in here which is really confusing and hard to read, but basically they looked at the percentage of diet beverages that people consumed and the likelihood of gaining weight when all of the things were kept constant. And again, it's a linear relationship. The more diet beverages you consume, the more artificial sweeteners you consume, the more likely you are to gain weight. And it has to do with how those sweeteners trigger the calories or the brain and liver hormones to seek more calories. What I've noticed lately in the past 10 years is that artificial sweeteners used to pretty much be in diet beverages, and now they're kind of everywhere. I'm kind of astounded at how many foods are being marketed as light or low calorie, or they use various marketing techniques to talk about them. And if you look at the ingredients list, the artificial sweeteners are absolutely ubiquitous. So it's important to point that out to people and ask and recommend that people avoid those. So what's going on here? This isn't just about calories in and calories out. We can tell that many genes are designed to quickly promote weight gain and obesity under various conditions. We know that physical stressors and psychological stressors trigger genetic and hormonal signals that promote obesity. And our livers and gut flora are carefully tuned to changes in the environment and respond by promoting obesity. So this is, of course, frustrating for people who are trying to lose weight, and it's complicated for clinicians who are trying to help them. But just from a physiological point of view, I think it's an interesting question to say, why would that be? Why are our bodies so built to hold on to weight? What are the benefits of gaining weight for your body and for your mind, for your psychological well-being? Gaining weight gives you resources in the face of stress. That's absolutely number one. It's evolutionarily triggered. It's instinct. It's survival. And so people are really programmed in a very heavy way to gain weight when they're faced with stress. It also offers protection, resilience, and security. And by that I mean both physical protection and psychological protection. I think that's worth thinking about and recognizing that that's what's going on for people. The question is, though, that doesn't excess weight cause disease? And how can that be helpful? So if your body's experiencing stress, and it causes you to gain weight, and then the weight causes disease, wouldn't that just add to your overall physiological stress? Like, why would our bodies do that? Why would that be the solution to stress, is to put on weight? Because wouldn't that just cause more problems? I think our paradigm about the relationship between obesity and disease is shifting. Obesity is highly correlated with disease, but obesity doesn't necessarily cause disease the way we think it does. Obesity and disease may actually be separate outcomes of the same stimulus. So here's our old paradigm. Our old paradigm is that people have poor health behaviors. They have poor eating habits, they eat excess calories, they have sedentary behavior, they have stress. That causes them to be overweight and obese. And then once they're overweight and obese, the overweight and obesity causes things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and those types of diseases lead to early death. And I think what we're learning now is that there's a little bit of a different paradigm that may be at play here. Not entirely, but certainly we're seeing the way this works. And that is that if people have poor habits, poor eating, sedentary behavior, and stress, as well as all of the genetic and environmental predispositions, that what they experience is inflammation in their body and hormone disruption. And it's the metabolic disturbances and inflammation that cause disease. That causes diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. It may also cause overweight and obesity. So when we see people with those diseases, we see that many of them are also overweight and obese. But maybe that there are two different pathways that are coming from the same stimulus. What we see in some mortality research is that actually overweight and obesity has a protective effect on mortality. so that if you have diabetes and you're also overweight, you're less likely to die early than somebody who has diabetes but is not overweight, which is really profound if you think about it. It really is another piece of information that makes us think that perhaps overweight and obesity and excess fat are our body's way of protecting ourselves and guarding against the impacts of those diseases. So here's a quick poll to kind of make this point. We know that type 2 diabetes is sort of our go-to disease for what being overweight can cause. If you're overweight, you're going to get type 2 diabetes. So given that being overweight is what's considered the predisposing factor for diabetes, the question is, what proportion of type 2 diabetics have a weight that's in the normal range, which is a BMI of 18 to 24.9 at diagnosis? That is, what percentage of people are not overweight when they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetics? Now, this is at the time of diagnosis. This is not during treatment. So this is a poll. You can go ahead and vote which one you think it is. Everyone have a chance to vote?
Hi, Helen. Yeah, we have some responses. So far it looks like yeah, almost everybody's voted here. We've got about 24% of people said that B, or the second option, 4%. About 36% of attendees said 8%. And most people, 40%, said voted for 12%.
Yep, that's right. It's 12%. And I kind of set you up for that, but I'm glad most of you figured that was the answer. 12% of people have normal weight at the time that they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetics. I found that number astounding, given that we think of type 2 diabetes as almost exclusively related to it. But it kind of lends more credence to this idea that what's going on for these folks is that they have metabolic disturbances in glucose and insulin related to a number of different factors in their body. They may or may not also gain weight because of those same factors, but it's really the metabolic disturbance that's at the heart of diabetes. So again, it's a cautionary thing about saying we have to realize that what we know in the science is that there's a high correlation between being overweight and having diseases, but correlation is not the same thing as causation, and that if we think about obesity as a protective factor for people, both physiologically and psychologically, it will help in our counseling. The other piece of data that came out around this was mortality data that was published in JAMA in 2013. This is a great study and really worth looking at, but they looked at all-cause mortality of people of different weight ranges. And they compared it to people with normal weight. I always put normal in quotes because who knows what the heck is normal. And this is just kind of how it's been defined, and there's a lot of problems with BMI. I really resist using BMI, and I don't use it in my clinical practice. But for sake of comparison and research, the BMI of 18 to 25 is considered healthy weight. And what they found was that people who are in the 25 to 30 range of BMI, which is considered overweight, they had a lower all-cause mortality than people in the normal weight range. Even more interesting, people with grade 1 obesity, which is the 30 to 35 range, this is where we're starting to talk about bariatric surgery in the 30 to 35 range of grade 1 obesity if you have significant comorbidities. Grade 1 obese people had no difference in all-cause mortality from people of normal weight. And then in grade 2 and 3 obese people, 35 or higher BMI, then you start seeing an increase in mortality compared to normal weight. But overweight and grade 1 obese people had lower all-cause mortality, and I think we really need to keep that in mind when we think of, is obesity protecting people or hurting people? Dr. Politi, who did that original ACEs study, is the author of this quote, and I use it liberally and credit him for it. He said that obesity may not be the problem. It may be the solution. And I guess that's the message I want to leave you with. It's not necessarily a great solution for all kinds of reasons, but we need to start thinking of it as the solution that people's bodies have come up with to protect them against something. And so we need to stop talking about obesity as if it is the problem, but really what are the behaviors and influences that might be contributing to it. Obesity may be self-protective. It's the high stress caused by low-quality diet, lack of sleep, toxins and viruses in the environment, the high stress caused by trauma and abuse, violence, oppression, and poverty. Those are the things that we're trying to work against. Those are the things we're trying to mitigate, not the obesity in and of itself. Obesity may be the protective factor that offers resources, security, resiliency, and psychological comfort, and so to stop targeting that as the issue. So what does this mean for clinical practice, and how should we reassess what we do in clinical practice? Did anybody participate in the exercise that was sent out? If you did, please raise your hand because I would really like to hear about your experience with it. Basically, the exercise asked you to do one of two things. Number one, if you're a clinician, to just stop routinely weighing your patients, other than if it was specifically needed for a certain reason, but for a routine weight to stop doing it. And if you are not a clinician and you're some sort of support staff in the clinic who does the weighing, when you weigh people, to weigh them in a different way that was more respectful. If anybody did the exercise and would like to share what they learned, please raise your hand.
Hi, Helen. It looks like about half the people have voted so far, and about 57% of folks said that they did not do the exercise, about 60, and then 40% are confused about the exercise. What exercise?
Oh, okay.
This was the exercise, so if you go back to this was the exercise that was sent out when you registered. There was an email that came to you to confirm your registration with instructions for this exercise. There's just kind of a little fun pre-work exercise for us to talk about. But
so it's okay. Here it is right here. Really, it was just to give people a chance to try this before we talked about it so that you would come with your own experience about it. But basically, I encourage all of you to try one of these two options, depending on if you're a clinician or if you're a staff member who routinely weighs people. Here it is right here on the slide. You can read it over and just give it a try. Really, I hope to influence you with the information that I'm presenting, but really, I think you will learn the most relevant pieces of information by how you interact with patients around their weight. And the most important way that we interact with patients around their weight is when we weigh them when they come in, and whether or not we weigh them when they come in. I'm going to move on unless, Rebecca, you had somebody that wanted to speak.
I didn't see anybody raising their hand, Helen, so I think that, yeah, that's fine to move on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to move on out of interest of time. So I always recommend to clinicians that they stop routinely weighing adults. And I know it's controversial and I know people resist it, but I'm going to really encourage you to try it yourself and see how it goes. Why I recommend this is because weighing people can be really distressing to them, regardless of how much they weigh. Even people that seem to be average weight or even underweight, weighing is a trigger for people. There's a social and psychological judgment that we place on weight in our culture, and they can't help but experience that when they come to our offices and get weighed. It also derails their energy for positive changes. I can't tell you how often I work with people on healthy weight management, and they feel really good about what's going on. They feel like they're making good changes, they're out walking, and they haven't done that before, and they feel like for the first time in their lives they've got a handle on things. And then they come to my office, and my staff weighs them, and they absolutely get deflated. They're like, what? I gained a pound, I haven't lost anything, why? How can that be? I'm working so hard. And it just absolutely derails all their positive energy around changes. And I couldn't figure out why we were weighing them. What am I going to do with that information? Why is the number on the scale more important to me than how this person feels and the extent to which they're having success in their behaviors? Because really, if what we know from the science is that it's not the weight itself, but the behaviors that are causing disease, then let's stop weighing people. That's the message. Let's focus on the behaviors and stop focusing on the numbers. That's also why I don't do BMIs in my office anymore. I don't think it's relevant information. I think what's relevant is how they're doing with their own goals. So we know that all children need to be weighed. Here's before everybody protests and tells me why they have to weigh people. Of course, all children need to be weighed at every visit to monitor their growth. Pregnant women need to be weighed at every visit to monitor their pregnancy. Yes, absolutely. And adults with congestive heart failure or kidney failure need to be weighed routinely because of their fluid issues. Absolutely, no questions about it. Those people need routine weights. But no other adults need routine weight checks at every visit. And it's not a benign intervention. So it's not that you can never weigh them, but I don't think they need to be weighed at every visit. You can be more judicious about how you weigh them and then be more respectful when you do it. I always encourage clinicians to treat weight like a lab test, not a vital sign. So right now it's a vital sign. Everybody gets it. As soon as they walk in the door, they get weighed, they get their blood pressure, they get, as part of just routine vital signs. It's not a vital sign, it's a lab test. So if you're going to do surgery and you need anesthesia, if you certain medication dosing, you need their weight, then fine. Then you get their weight for that because it's a lab test. You need to do this test in order to do this intervention. If you're going to weigh somebody, I encourage you to get consent before you weigh them. Would it be okay if we check your weight today? To ask them, to not insist that they stand on the scale, but to ask first. Weighing should occur in private, like any lab test. You wouldn't do an exam out in the hallway, and so you shouldn't do a weight out in the hallway either, that it should be in a private space where nobody else can see what's going on. And then to respect the fact that the patient may not want to see their results. So what I do is I ask permission to weigh them. If they say it's okay, I ask if they would like the results, and if they don't want to know how much they weigh, then I encourage them to stand backwards on the scale so that they can't see the number. I record it privately. I make sure it's not in the after visit summary because, we work really hard to not give that to people when they are in the office, and then we give them an after visit summary that prints their weight and their BMI that they have to stare at when they go home. So it's being really respectful about how we approach weighing. There's a number of blogs that I have spent a lot of time on understanding how weight affects people. And if you really look into that kind of work, you'll find that there's just amazing stories about how much people avoid the doctor because they don't want to be weighed. There's a particular story about a woman who didn't know she had asthma and just thought that her breathing problems were related to something else, and she avoided going to the doctor for a very, very long time when she had clear asthma symptoms because she didn't want to be weighed. Weighing was really triggering for her, and it made her feel horrible, and she didn't want to know how much she weighed. And so she avoided going to the doctor until she had such a severe asthma attack that they had to call 911, and she went to the hospital in an emergency, in an ambulance to the emergency room. And she says what she remembers thinking, she was laying in the back of the ambulance with an oxygen mask on her and severe respiratory distress, looking out the back window of the ambulance, and the thought that occurred to her in her mind was, at least in the ER, they won't weigh me. That's what she was thinking at that moment. And so it's a really profound impact that it has on people. We have to realize how we may be hurting people by doing routine weights. Other things you can do to approach weight respectfully, make sure that there are chairs in your waiting room that accommodate large body people. There's a number of benches that are available. Benches are the best solution because they don't predetermine how big the person is when they sit on it. Make sure that every room is stocked with extra large gowns and blood pressure cuffs. What we heard from our work is that it's really embarrassing for people when you have to leave the room to get an extra large cuff or you have to leave the room to get an extra large gown. It makes people feel embarrassed and ashamed that the regular equipment doesn't fit them. So if that's available in every room, it helps people to feel more comfortable and confident. Beware of attribution bias. One of the things we know is that people that struggle with their weight, they go to the doctor and the doctor or the clinician thinks that everything that's wrong with them is due to their weight. It's not true, and there's a lot of misdiagnosis based on attribution bias. So really make sure that you consider all possible causes for the person's symptoms, not just their weight. If you believe that weight is contributing to a condition that they have, ask if it's okay to discuss weight with them today or if they prefer to wait for a different visit. Not everybody wants to discuss it. Again, the conversation itself can be really triggering, so you got to be careful about that. So I do work with people on weight management, but it's a very involved process. Here are the basic pieces of it. I'm not going to go into this today. It takes a lot of time and a lot of consistent work with people to do weight management. But what I encourage people to do more is is to work on healthy weight management with everybody. So for most people, they don't have the time or the energy or the expertise to go through this extensive list with everybody and to meet with them 2 to 3 times a month on an ongoing basis to work on weight management. But what we can do is promote healthy weight management for everyone. So what I encourage in routine primary care is to talk about healthy weight management instead of weight loss. I'm aware of the time. I'm going to go through the next couple of slides kind of quickly, and I have my contact information on the slide. If you have questions, I really encourage you to reach out, but I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. So the difference between weight loss and healthy weight management is the focus. So healthy weight management is a lifelong process that's focused on health. It's not focused on short-term numbers. Success is defined by reaching your behavior goals versus reaching a certain number. And in healthy weight management, we're talking to everybody. It doesn't matter if they're currently underweight or average weight or overweight. It doesn't matter what their weight is. We're talking to everybody about adopting healthy behaviors. It's about reframing the task from weight loss to self-care. This is the message. If you want to make an impact in your clinical practice on healthy weight management, think about how are you taking care of yourself. This is about taking care of yourself. It's not about the number on the scale. Let's talk about what you can do to take care of yourself and take care of the issues that may be contributing to your weight. So I encourage people to talk with everyone about healthy weight management strategies regardless of what they weigh. This is a really good way to get practice. One of the biggest issues that clinicians tell me they have is they don't even know how to bring it up with people. How do you start talking about weight? And the best way to start is to bring it up with everybody in a very short, quick script that you add on to other visits. And I know you can't literally do it with everybody, but every time you have a chance, practice doing these scripts, and it's regardless of what the person weighs or regardless of whether they're struggling with their weight or whether their concern has to do with their weight. The things that I recommend that you talk about are these 7 topics: sleep, stress, beverages, daily activity levels, mindfulness, exercise, and healthy food choices. You'll notice that exercise and healthy food choices are the last thing I talk about. That's what people get bombarded with, is information about exercise and eating right. They don't need to hear that from us. They need to hear about some of the other things that actually may be having more of an impact and getting in their way. So what I've done in the last part of the talk is give you my scripts for each of these 7 topics. We're not going to have time to go through them all today, but I encourage you to read them. So there's sleep, stress, beverages, they're all there. And I'll just go through one of them with you to give you an idea of what a script looks like, and then you can see what the wording is and the advice is for the rest of them. So for instance, for sleep, I always start with sleep. And you can pick a month. You say, this month I'm talking to all of my patients about sleep. We know that getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep most every night is important for health and healthy weight management. How's that going for you? That's the message. That's the script. That's the extent of it. You just check in with people about sleep, and you frame it as a healthy behavior that's important for both health and healthy weight management. You give a simple chunk of information. Sleep is really important. You got to get 7 to 9 hours at night. How is that going? And if people are struggling with it, then there's a couple of tips in the bullet points about things to talk about: screens, starting your sleep early before 11. If you start sleeping after that, it has an influence on your hormones. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol before bed. And then, stretching, relaxing, all of the sleep hygiene things that our sleep colleagues have been telling us for years about what promotes healthy sleep, but just checking in with everyone about sleep. The others are very similar. You just substitute what the issue is. So I'm talking to all my patients this month about stress management. We know that coping with stress in healthy ways is important for health and healthy weight management. How is that going for you? And then here's some things that you can advise them to do. And the simple scripts follow. So I'm going to stop there because you can go through these on your own to see what those scripts look like. But we have found that using those simple strategies, like not routinely weighing people and giving them simple scripts of behaviors that they can think about, is the most effective approach in primary care to healthy weight management. If you want more information about going more in depth with people, like I said, you can contact me offline. And I think we have a couple minutes for questions. I want to check in with you guys to see if there are quick questions that I can adjust before we sign off.
Hi, Helen. This is Rebecca, and I think everyone is blown away by how amazing this information has been and how altering. I know Marissa and I have just been kind of shock and awe, sort of. There haven't been any questions except for will we be able to access these handouts later? And yes, we will post the slides with all the links and Helen's contact information to our website and the recording, so you can share it as well. But if you do have any questions, you can feel free to enter them here, or again, raise your hand if you'd like. But so far, I think we're all just amazed. Helen, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Yes, no problem. I just want to show the resources slide really quick. Oh, here it is. So a couple of resources too, just before we sign off. The things that have really influenced me are Health at Every Size. It's a really great website. I encourage you to check that out. The mindless eating work of Brian Wansink is incredible. I've learned so much from him, and it's really helped me in counseling my patients. And then if you're looking for a textbook to really get more in depth on talking to people authoritatively about nutrition particularly and its role in health and disease, this is an amazing textbook that I use very frequently, and you can access that. There's my contact information there. And I can talk to you more about the tools or the scripts that we developed, and I'd be happy to be available to you if you need that.
Thank you, Helen. We did have one quick question, and maybe this person can follow up with you on offline, but about whether or not there are any weight management brochures that you use. And so maybe if you have some that you like to use, we can post those on the website along with the slides and recording.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple of things. We built the world's biggest brochure, that Healthy Weight Management Guide, and we kept those in the room. But yeah, I can give you a couple of quick summary ones that we use. But yeah, I like the quick check-ins better than brochures. I like the quick, how's it going for you with sleep? How's it going for you with stress? Those quick check-ins I think are more effective than handouts. But yeah, if you want a handout, I can share some things.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're a little bit, or just 2 minutes over time, so thank you everyone for sticking with us, and thank you again so much, Helen. This has been wonderful. We really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge, and thank you everyone who's been on the call today.
Yeah, thanks Rebecca and Marissa for your help and support.
All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Take care.